Happy Friday. We're just about to head into the last long weekend of the summer. Don't let that get you down. This is going to be a great one, I'm sure. This week on This Perspective, we're going to talk about what retirement looks like. As we move into September, this is a great time to sit down, have a little bit of a look at your planning, what retirement is actually going to look like, not just the numbers, but what that can look like for you and your family. With school starting back again next week, we're also going to take a look at some ways to save for the kids' education. RESPs are one of the greatest ways to do it. What does that actually mean? How do you get money out of an RESP? What are some alternatives as well? And then finally, we're going to leave you with some fun school facts as well that I guarantee you didn't know. All right, so you slogged for the past 20 to 30 years to put yourself in the position to have the financial freedom to not have to work anymore. You've done an excellent job to build that nest egg, but now what? Most Canadians that have put themselves in the situation that you're in right now knew that planning for retirement was crucial to their success, but most Canadians don't have a plan for what retirement's actually going to look like for them going forward. The average Canadian retires at 65 and then has an average life expectancy of almost 82 years old. So that says that more than half the population is going to live past the age of 82, more if you're a woman, less if you're a man. This means that if you're just an average Canadian, retirement can last almost 20 years, and for many, that number can be significantly longer. There are some financial considerations as you approach retirement, like taking into account all your sources of income, the projected expenses, including fixed expenses and leisure expenses. You're probably going to want to travel more or have that golf membership. And then when to start collecting CPP and OAS. Getting any of these items wrong could be detrimental to your retirement plans. So building out your financial plan should be a major priority before throwing that retirement party. For example, taking your CPP out at 60 instead of 65 could cost you more than $120,000. Now, this really depends on life expectancy as well as a number of other factors. So there's a lot of considerations even with just that one little piece of it. Now, when looking at your financial picture, using the 4% rule could be a great way to get a general idea if your investments can keep up with your spending habits. It's not going to replace a full financial plan that's going to look at how withdrawals are taxed in different accounts, such as your RSP and TFSA and non-registered or corporate accounts. Nor will it really dive into inflation, which we're seeing a lot right now, and then the various rates of return and order of those returns as well. So let's say that you have looked at all those numbers, you've got that part figured out, and if you don't, contacting a professional is always my recommendation. And I look for someone who has the certified financial planner designation as the only person I trust with something as important as this. There's also some other designations to look for, like the RRC, the Retirement Registered Consultant designation, as well as many others that can give you an idea of their proficiency in dealing with retirement. As you can imagine, with almost 15 years working with high net worth Canadians, helping them achieve the best possible retirements, I've really seen a lot. Our team has worked with clients that have built wildly fulfilling and successful retirements, while others have really struggled to find the same level of satisfaction. Once that financial freedom is reached, it's not uncommon to feel a real sense of freedom and joy, but also to grapple with the anxiety and some emptiness, as there are many possibilities of what lies ahead, and it's always clear what the right path may be. It's perfectly normal to discover that post-financial freedom isn't as happy as what you might have expected it to be. As you transition into retirement, you no longer have to set an alarm and deadlines cease to exist. You now have the freedom to spend the days exactly how you'd like. Taking a nice long vacation might be the best way to start your retirement. Take that trip that you've been putting off. Go spend some quality time with children and grandchildren, or just tend to that beautiful garden that's been neglected over the last couple of years. As you transition fully into retirement, you're really going to want to add some structure and meaning to give you the most fulfilling retirement. I found that through working with hundreds of clients over the years that the most successful retirements are with those individuals that had a plan leading into retirement on what their post-work life was going to look like. Now, that doesn't mean that they adhere to a strict schedule or are necessarily busier than their working life, although some definitely are. What it means is that they found a balance between everything from socializing to volunteering. They found that a diverse mix of stimulating activities can recreate that kind of meaningful days that really promote fulfilling retirement. Many of the retired clients that we work with continue to seek purpose and meaning with the activities that they do take on. I've got a couple quick client stories that I think will really illustrate the difference between somebody who has planned really well and is having that great retirement and someone who might not be having the most fulfilling type of retirement. So I had a client that I worked with for many years, and each meeting that we had leading up to retirement was essentially a countdown to the day that he could call his employer and start collecting his full pension and never have to step foot in the office again. We built him a great financial plan, helped him create a supplement to his pension, create that financial freedom that would really allow him to never have to think about money again. He'd be able to do what most Canadians would be jealous of in his retirement. In our discussions, we talked a lot about what his retirement would look like, but he was never really able to fully determine what he would want to do with all his newfound freedom. It was just really get into that end line that was the main goal for him. As you can imagine, he retired at the earliest possible moment and was ecstatic to leave the company. It was probably one of the greatest days of his life. He spent a few weeks traveling, visit his grandchildren, but the families eventually get back to their lives, and he had to head back home. Aside from playing a couple rounds of golf each week during the summer, he really failed to establish a good routine. During his first several years of retirement, he began sleeping a little bit longer each day, golfing a little bit less, and generally not socializing as much as he did during his working life. Conversely, a client who I feel has had a successful retirement so far does things much differently. With arguably less financial freedom than my previous client, there was really no pension involved in this one. This client created a retirement that is both fun and fulfilling. Along with our financial planning to make sure that they had the assets and risk management solutions in place, we also built them a retirement plan. They spent much of their time planning on what they wanted the retirement to look like and built a list of things that they really wanted to accomplish in retirement. Their list included spend more time with their children and grandchildren, but also went a step further to not only spend more time, but also help them out in very specific areas. They had meaningful conversations with their children and what they were willing and unwilling to do, and made sure their children actually wanted their help. So some of these conversations are really important in this aspect as well when it comes to family and all of a sudden being retired and just plopping yourself into your kids' and grandkids' life in a maybe unconstructive way. They always traveled through their working lives, but there were some places they wanted to spend more time visiting than was possible while they still had their working obligations. There were hobbies that they had always wanted to spend more time doing, and there was a few that they really wanted to try out for the first time. They also had some charities that they had given money to over the years and really wanted to start playing a more active role, a little more hands-on kind of role with them. Almost a decade into their retirements at this point, they're as busy as ever. Their social life is envious, and they're working closely with organizations that they're really passionate about. And now they're creating those meaningful relations with their children and grandchildren, really being a part of those as opposed to viewing from afar. As you head into your retirement years, which could last as long as your working years, make sure that you take the time to spend some time to make sure that you create the best, most gratifying 20 to 30 years of your life. With school starting back up next week, I thought it was a great time to sit down and have a look at some great ways to save for post-secondary education and some ways to start taking that money out. You'll really realize here that not all money coming out is exactly the same. And if you're already in that position, you know that the cost of post-secondary education in Canada can be quite expensive. For tuition fees, to books, to living expenses, the financial burden can be overwhelming for many families and students. And one of the most popular ways to save for post-secondary education is through the Registered Retirement Savings Plan, or the RESP. But there are a few other strategies to consider. We're going to need more time to get into some of those than we have here today, but I'm happy to get into some of those as well, especially if you're a business owner. There's some great avenues there. We can also look at TFSAs or child CI policies with the return of premium, which can be a great addition at this point in time. RESPs are essentially a tax-sheltered investment account. They're designed to help parents, grandparents, and other family members save for a child's education. Contributions to an RESP are not tax deductible like an RRSP, but the income and gains generated inside the account grow tax-free until that they are actually withdrawn. A key component to the RESP is the Canada Education Savings Grant, or CESG. This is something that the government provides, which is 20% of the first $2,500 contributed annually per child, up to a lifetime maximum of $7,200. Additionally, low-income families may qualify for the Canada Learning Bond, or the CLB, which provides up to $2,000 per child. So not only do you receive the $500 per year on that $2,500 that you contribute, but you can also go back and catch up on unused CESGs from previous years if you're unable to contribute the full $2,500 in any given year. The maximum CSG you can receive in any given year is $1,000, so you can go back 2 years at a time in any given year, which included the grant on the current year's contribution and then those carry forward amounts. If you have a child heading off to college or university this year, there are a couple things to keep in mind when making the withdrawals from the RESPs. If this is the first year, there is a 13-week rule. In the first 13 weeks of a full-time post-secondary program, the beneficiary can only withdraw a maximum of $5,000 of earnings and grants from the RESP. After this time, there are no limits. And although there are no restrictions, the income and grants are taxable to the beneficiary. So some tax planning is important, especially if that student has a part-time job. There are 3 different ways that funds can be withdrawn from an RESP, and each has its own set of rules and tax implications. The first is post-secondary education payments, or PSEs. These are withdrawn from the original contributions of the RESP. So it's a return on the investment initially. Since the contributions were made with after-tax dollars, they're not subject to the taxes upon being withdrawn. These can be withdrawn tax-free at any time. The second is educational assistance payments, or EAPs, and these consist of investment earnings and government contributions. This is a mix of interest, dividends, capital gains, CESGs, and CLBs. These amounts are taxable in the hands of the beneficiary, but since the students typically have a low income and with some proper withdrawal strategies, little to no tax should be paid by the student on these withdrawals. The third only exists if there are earnings still remaining after the beneficiary has completed their post-secondary education, and it's called the accumulated income payments, or AIP. AIPs are taxable in the hands of the subscriber, which is the person who opened the account for the child, and this is typically the parent or guardian. These are taxable at the regular tax rate of that subscriber, plus an additional 20% penalty, and are subject to withdrawal tax at the time of withdrawal. You can, however, elect to transfer the AIP into an RRSP or spousal RSP upon up to a maximum of $50,000, provided you have sufficient contribution room. It's important to create a strategy on how to withdraw the funds from an RESP to ensure that the time and amount create the lowest tax implications. You've worked really hard to save for your child's education, so take advantage of the grants and bonds, and then just don't give it back to the government by being overtaxed. All right, it's time for kids to go back to school. I'm sure a lot of parents are going to be happy with that. So I thought it would be fun to have a look at, some interesting facts about school and education. So the first thing is the word school comes from the ancient Greek word skol. I probably did not pronounce that right, but which means leisure. And this is probably very ironic for most kids that are going back to school who probably don't associate school with leisure, but more with the actual work. Summer vacation are relatively new to schooling. It wasn't until the 19th century that the idea of summer break actually began. And this definitely wasn't going to ninja camp or some other kind of cool day camp that the kids nowadays get to go to. These children were expected to take a break from their learning to help out on farms and with harvests. The earliest form of education dates back to ancient Mesopotamia around 3500 BC. The Sumerians developed a writing system known as cuneiform and established schools to teach boys to read and write. Yes, just boys. Ancient Egypt also began their formal education around the same time, which was, again, primarily for boys and for the upper class. As well as learning to read and write, they were taught arithmetic and other subjects like geometry and astronomy. The modern education system really began to take shape during the Enlightenment in Europe around the 17th, 18th century. This included structured levels of education, standardized curricula, trained teachers, and formal assessments. It was King Frederick the Great of Prussia that made the first education mandatory in 1763 for all boys and girls until the age of 13 or 14. It wasn't for another almost 100 years until standardized testing became common thanks to the introduction of the British Civil Service in 1855. In the late 19th century, the grading system as we know it today began in the United States. Prior to this, schools used various methods to assess students, such as written or oral examinations. It was also during the 19th century that the idea of free and compulsory education started to gain traction. Universities and colleges date back to the Middle Ages, but the modern university model really began to take shape in the 19th century with the founding of institutions like the University of Berlin in 1810. So I really hope that kicked off the school year with some great education on education. Thank you so much for listening and watching this week. Hope you really learned something interesting. If you have any questions about how to actually make some plans for retirement so that you are getting the most of it, if you do have some kids with some education needs, happy to lend an ear and give you some ideas on how you can maximize both of those as well. Enjoy the long weekend. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks. Bye.